Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast. I'm your host, Tapasio Althouse. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, we have a very special guest on the show, Dr. Maurice Elias, a pioneering figure in the field of social emotional learning and character development. Dr. Elias is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University, where he directs the Rutgers Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab and co-directs the Academy for SEL in Schools. His extensive body of work has shaped the way educators approach SEL and civic engagement in schools, bridging the gaps between research, practice, and practical policy. He has also authored foundational books like Morning Classroom Conversations, Build Your Students' Social, Emotional, Character, and Communication Skills Every Day, as well as Students Taking Action Together, 5 Teaching Techniques, SEL, Civic Engagement, and a Healthy Democracy. His research has been pivotal in connecting academic success with SEL and character development, emphasizing the importance of building skills for facing the tests of life, not a life of tests, which we love. I loved reading that quote. We'll discuss how his work addresses today's urgent challenges and why he believes integrating SEL into everyday school life is essential to nurturing emotionally intelligent, responsible, and resilient youth. We are so excited for today's conversation. Dr. Elias, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. So I would love to hear, there's a lot to unpack today. You have quite an extensive background in SEL. I'd love to just start from the beginning and hear about what originally inspired you to focus on SEL and character development and how that has just evolved over time.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question the way you did, because the beginning starts before SEL. SEL came into existence around 1995, 1997 as a term, as a result of the publication of Daniel Goleman's landmark book, Emotional Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And after he published that book, there was a recognition that there needs to be a focus on, if you will, emotional intelligence in schools. And there was a search for a term that would capture this. And the term that was eventually chosen was social emotional learning. But the work involved in that has been ongoing for decades before that time. And myself and a number of other colleagues, for example, formed a consortium on the school-based promotion of social competence. And so before there was social emotional learning, there was the idea of social competence. And before there was that, there was the idea of social skills. And before that, there was the idea of character. So this is nothing new. As long as there have been people on the earth, there have been concerns about social skills, how you get along with other people, and character. My own focus came about as part of my training as a clinical psychologist. I was seeing so many kids and families with troubles. And in the course of dealing with their troubles, other clinicians, myself, would say, if only the schools had done a better job, if only the parents had more support. And every time I said, if only, I felt that, well, why not? Well, why not? Why can't the schools do better? Why can't we give more support to parents? And so that's really what shaped the direction of my work. What is it that schools need to be giving kids that they need for success in school and life? And what kind of supports do we need to be giving parents for success in parenting before they get into trouble? And so that's kind of the backstory. So the details are that a lot of research has gone into answering those questions. And one of the big answers is that the kids need social emotional skills. They need social emotional competencies. And, These are very basic things. The ability to read feelings in other people,
Mhm.
the ability to deal with your own strong anger when you have it without hurting other people, the ability to have empathy for other people. If we just took those three skills and think in our own lives of all the places where we see them lacking, and how much life would be better if people could read other people's feelings accurately and clearly, restrain their anger, and have empathy. And we realize how important these skills are in every context, and certainly in schools.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, this idea has been around since humans have been alive, but I think it's really powerful to attach a name to it, so attaching a formal name like social emotional learning is really it allows people to sort of have ownership and confidence over what they're learning, which I think is so important. And I was going over your program at Rutgers, the social emotional and character development lab, and I love, out of a lot of sites I've seen, I really like how precise your terminology is, because you want to focus on process and not programs. You want to improve efficiency and effectiveness. What else did you say? You want to focus on inspiration before remediation. I think it
Yep.
was, yeah, inspiration before remediation. And
Yes.
I really love how precise you are with your words, because I think the more precise you are with how you define certain things, the more empowered you can be, and the better stronghold people can have over complex feelings and emotions to sort of have a more, I mean, I'm not like this word, but synergistic democracy. And so with that being said, I'd love to hear more about your role at the Rutgers Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab, what your key initiatives are, and how you are trying to relay them to people and make a difference.
Well, things change over time and because of circumstances. And one of the reasons I was so especially excited to be able to speak on your podcast was because a lot of our work has begun to dovetail into the area of civic engagement. And how do we prepare our kids to assume the roles that they're going to have to assume in our increasingly complex democracy? And here again, this is going to involve some very important social emotional skills. One very important social emotional skill is listening carefully and accurately to what other people are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is to read carefully the text that's in front of you and read what's there and not what you want to be there or what you think should be there. And, these are foundational skills that we see missing in so much of our debate and discourse. And we're seeing our kids feel very pessimistic about their capacity to engage in civic dialogue and civic work. And this is terrible. We need our kids to feel, again, inspired so that they recognize that they've got a lot to contribute. When I talk with kids and teachers, I just say, look at what's going on around you. You can do at least as well. I mean, it's not like there's such great things going on that you should say, oh my God, I'll never be able to contribute. You can contribute. You can do, but it takes a little work. And, in one of the books that you mentioned, Students Taking Action Together, we began to really put together our processes that we feel it's so important for kids to experience, such as respectful, empathic debate. The idea that most kids, maybe most people, when they're sitting around in a circle, all they're thinking about is what they're going to say. They're not listening to what's being said around them. And this is true very often in debate. I'm going to present my point of view as strongly as I can, and that's my job. In respectful debate, you not only have to present your point of view, you have to present the other side's point of view. You have to have listened carefully enough and even researched it to be able to replicate it. And so, I mean, that may not sound like a big thing, but it is a big thing. Right now, we have too many people who are adopting slogans, taking on causes and positions that they really don't understand. And this is not going to be helpful for our democracy. Another one of these techniques for students taking action together is a problem-solving approach. You know, when we ask kids to investigate or think about social issues, they're very complicated. It's sort of overwhelming to think about the social issues. But a problem-solving approach can help break that down for kids, where they try to understand who are the people involved, how are they feeling about the situation, what are their goals, what are their options, what are the consequences of those options, what are the obstacles they're going to face. No, there's a systematic way of going through issues. One of my students many years ago did a dissertation where she had a bunch of kids reading scholastic current events. And some of the kids, they just discussed it. And for other kids, she gave them a problem-solving framework to use to think through what they were reading. And at the end of the year, she gave the kids an article, and she asked them to make sense out of it. And the kids that didn't have a framework really couldn't make sense out of the article. And the kids that did have a framework used that framework for this new article that they hadn't seen before. And that's the idea. If we help our kids learn ways of thinking about complicated events, processing the emotions and positions and goals and complexities involved, they will embrace that. And we've seen that over and over again.
Right. It seems like you're saying, you know, having a systematic approach in the classroom and intentionally rehearsing these sort of democratic behaviors can really help outside the classroom. And right now it's October 29th. We're, you know, a week away from elections. There's a lot of political fervor going on right now. And so this seems to really be a appropriate discussion, especially when we're talking about, you know, kids who will be the future of our nation. As you were talking, I was thinking about videos that I've been watching. You know, this one guy went to a local university, and as you're saying that, you know, it seemed like he was parroting a lot of things his parents were saying, parroting a lot of slogans he was saying, or he was hearing, you know, in public discourse, which we've all been victim to, right? And as I'm thinking about this, I want to know your opinion on the power of saying something like, I don't know, you know, and I think that's a really, you know, important thing to discuss right now too, is sometimes, you know, people, and especially kids, and even when you're in your 30s or 40s, you don't really have the answer. You don't know what your stance is on certain issues. How do you approach that? How do you approach, you know, a student who comes up to you and says, I just don't know what my stance is on that, and sort of being okay with that? Because I think that ties into being a critical thinker and being able to think on your own, but also being able to say, I don't know, I don't have enough information on that to really form an opinion.
Yeah, you know, this brings up one of the reasons why we changed the name of my lab from Social Emotional Learning Lab, which is what it was originally, to Social Emotional and Character Development Lab. Because we recognize that skills take you only so far, but values give you direction. Arthur Schwartz, who is the chairman of character.org, said that character gives SEL its why, its direction. And so when a kid says, I don't know about an issue, my first question is, well, how important is it to you? Because if it's not important, then, you know, you don't know. And, you know, don't worry about it. If it is important to you, then the next question is, well, how are you going to help yourself learn more about it and come to an opinion? Because that's the biggest problem, is when kids are stymied by their lack of knowledge. But, these are the same kids who, when they don't know something, in sort of everyday life, they go to Google, they ask Siri, they ask Alexa. They have no problem when they don't know something trying to get answers. But when it's more complicated, civic things, they don't always. And I think partly that's because we have not let kids feel empowered. John
Mhm.
Dewey, many years ago, said that the way we're going to build democracy is not by teaching democracy, but by living democracy in our schools, by having kids feel like they're a part of the school. So, as an example, in our STAT, Student Taking Action Together program, one of the first problems we have kids address and this was based on a survey of kids' most egregious problems in school, is cafeteria lunches in middle school. So we pose a question to kids, what we call a yes, no, maybe question. And the question is that the statement is cafeteria food in middle school is decision of adults only, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And we ask the kids if they believe that to be true. Yes, they don't believe it. No, or maybe they're not sure.
Mhm.
And that's important because if your answer to that question is yes, I believe it, then you're not going to try to change it. You're going to be complaining about the food and all that. So first of all, we want to get the kids to understand that, well, maybe something can be done. And then we engage the kids in small groups in the problem-solving approach. What's the problem with the food? What are the issues? Who are the different people involved? There's cafeteria workers, there are the people that order the food, school administrators, a whole lot of people, all different perspectives. And they learn how to tackle this problem, arrive at a solution, and then present it to school administration. And that last part is so important because we have so many kids who, I don't know, I may be dating myself, so forgive me. If you've ever heard of the Honeymooners television show, old show
Yeah.
with Jack Gleason. And when he didn't know something, when he got tongue-tied, he'd go, "Ahamana, hamana, 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 hamana." And
Right.
that's what happens to a lot of kids. They have great ideas. You put them in front of the school principal, and they go, "Ahamana, hamana, hamana." And what do? They look down, they shuffle their feet, they can't articulate. And
Right.
so last piece, you work with your team, you develop the idea, and then you plan how you're going to present it, and you practice it so that you can do it.
Mhm.
How you learn how to make a difference. And once you start making a difference on things in your school, then you can begin to envision that you can make a difference in things outside your school. But if you've
Mhm.
had no experience with this, well, then why would you even think you could even tackle a social issue or a social problem outside your school? You would think, I've got nothing to contribute. But in reality, kids have a lot to contribute.
Right. Yeah, that's really important. I really love how you tie in civic engagement with K through 12 because that seems to be overlooked in that hemisphere. We seem to focus a lot on college students being the most impact, but and to our listeners too, I really hope that you can look up his book, Students Taking Action Together, just so you guys know it's the it's a field tested program, STAT for short, and built research backed technique strategies. And I really like the idea of empowering young children when, in that time in their life, they don't really feel empowered. I'd love to hear about what you do at Rutgers and how you are helping, college students as well, and what that process looks like when they don't go through a program like this, if they do go through a program like this, and just how you're involved in the more ivory tower aspect.
Yeah, we have a lot of students working in our lab, and we prepare them to go out and work in the schools. And as they go out and work in the schools, they learn these techniques, these approaches. and they learn how powerful they are. And then they begin to see that they make a difference in the people they're working with. So they bring it into their own lives. So that's one way that our lab sort of teaches by doing. And then in the work that we do with college students, I mean, I teach a course called Community Psychology. And in that course, we actually have a part of the course involves students defining a social issue of concern to them, and then going through a process very much like the STAT process to develop an action plan. And then they create what we call an action communication, where they take what they've learned and they share it with somebody. So let me give you a specific example. Every semester, and I have been doing this course for over 40 years, every semester the students complain about the buses and parking. And they have a lot of insight. And so they generate some ideas and thoughts and plans, and then they create communications to who? The director of parking, the director of transportation, the president of the university. And they generate this, they deliver this. Occasionally they get answers. And we talk about the fact that, you can't control whether you get an answer. But one thing we can be sure of, if you don't communicate, you're not hearing anything. If you communicate, you might hear something. And so it's a very powerful process for, again, college students to take issues that they think are beyond their influence or control and to be able to systematically work together. And I have them work in groups because they have different ideas. And I make it very clear to them that when you communicate to these people, you have to have one idea. And so you have to work with each other to create that one idea. That one idea may be somebody's idea that everybody else decides is great. Or it may be an idea that you develop out of everybody's ideas, but that really isn't anybody's idea. Or somewhere in between. But it's got to be one idea, and you've got to work on it together. And you don't have an infinite amount of time. Because I explained to them that sometimes I will get called to speak in front of a legislative hearing or something like that. And they don't say to me, well, take as much time as you want to prepare. They say to me, you're going to be there Thursday at 9:00, and you have to be there. And so the same thing is true with this stuff. I put them under a time constraint. I mean, there is a semester time constraint, but it's very realistic. They have to pull together the best thing they can pull together in the time they have and communicate it in the best way possible. So these are things that, they don't change. They don't really change. From the time students are very young, they start to develop these skills, and it doesn't stop.
It's funny, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about my college days, and I initially did not want to go to college. I was very much a lone wolf, critical thinker, and I thought a bunch of people. And I went, I graduated 4 years and everything. And I look back and I am so glad I was able to get an education. And the biggest reason, it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about, is how I am able to organize my thoughts now as an adult. And I really don't think if I didn't have this education, this formal education, I don't think I would be able to, I do believe I'd have the same intelligence, but intelligence without organization really just is chaos, And what it sounds like you're talking about is, when you get into these groups, you really have to organize your thoughts. And if you can't do that, and if you don't have someone there to help you, it's really hard. It's really hard to learn organization on your own without having a few years of tribulation before that. When you're in a academic setting that forces you to organize, it's really powerful, and it really, I think, turns a switch in your brain. And so have you seen students, university students, who have really come out of their shell being in programs like this? Because I can imagine, there are some students who are perceptive to it, and there are some students who are just like, this is exactly what you needed to sort of get out of that shell and really be able to sharpen your tools? Are you able to, I'm sure that's why you're into teaching, you see that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, my feeling is that higher education, to be truly higher education, should give every student the opportunity to learn how to contribute in meaningful ways. Means I work with the students that take my class, but we got a lot of students at Rutgers who don't take my class, and we have some service learning opportunities at Rutgers, but the vast majority of students do not have them. And by service learning, I want to make an important distinction between service learning and community service. Community service is when you go to a soup kitchen or you go to a senior citizen center and you're there for a certain amount of time, and maybe you tutor some kids. Very, very good. Service learning is when there is a strong academic component to that same activity, so that before you go to the senior center, you learn about aging, you learn about the problems of the senior. And then when you come back from the senior center, you just don't come back, you come back into a reflective process that helps you process what you saw and talk about it and articulate it and share feelings with other people who were there. And then at the end of it all, in a service learning experience, you teach others who are not in the senior citizen center what your experience was like. And that forces you to once again organize your thinking, take other people's perspectives, and articulate. All these things are critical skills for our democracy, for civic life, and for a civil civic life. And when people don't have these skills, and they also don't have the skills to manage their strong emotions, they are quick to opt to superficial solutions and often to violent intimidation. So we shouldn't be shocked by what we're seeing, because we're not equipping our future citizens with what they need.
Right. Yeah, I think the word that really stood out to me when you were speaking was reflection. You hear about reflection in yoga classes, meditation classes, but I think it's really important to incorporate this word in political history classes, so history doesn't repeat itself. Reflection is so important, and I think that's a big part of people who work in social emotional learning and civility, and this word doesn't get dropped as much as it should, is a moment for reflection and a moment to think. Because I understand, we've all been there, where you get really excited about a topic and you want to just blurt out whatever, and you realize it might have caused a bit more damage than.
But cognitive science will tell you that if you're in a class in a 42-minute period, the best way to spend minutes 39 to 42 are not by adding more content, but by taking those 3 minutes to reflect on what happened in the previous 39 minutes, to jot down what are my takeaways from everything that happened in the first 39 minutes. Don't just fill me up for 42 minutes and then I'm off to the next class. I'm going to start to use it. But if I'm keeping an ongoing reflective journal across my classes, it's going to do me a lot more good. And of course, it'll do especially good in history and civics classes, where things get thrown at kids and they don't really have a chance to process them.
Yeah, they don't have a process to really understand their values. And I remember that too, being in college, not having a moment to understand my values until I got out of college. And I really had to figure out what just happened in these past 4 years. I didn't really have a class that was like, let's process all of this information, it wasn't really until I got into wellness classes like yoga, and you have the yin and you have yin period, which I love, where you're doing your asanas, you're doing your poses, and the last 5 minutes is decompress. And that's a moment to reflect on your body, or a moment to reflect on your breathing. And that just needs to be incorporated more into educational systems, because your brain is really important, like it needs time to decompress.
Yep. And school is a difficult time, because school is a time when kids are spending most of their day encountering things they don't know.
Exactly.
And so how much of that can you take in one day? You need some opportunity to step back during that time and just get it all sorted out and help it connect with what you already do know. Because if what you're learning doesn't connect to what you already know, then it's not going to stick.
Right.
And the same
Right.
thing is true in civics education as well. It's the experience that makes things ultimately stick.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I'd love to hear, I mean, we're running out of time, but I'd love to hear just what what you think the future of civic discourse and social emotional learning will look like in its trajectory. Because as you were saying before, it's come a long way as far as terminology goes, Daniel Goleman's book, and people have been adding to that on a day-to-day basis, because we understand the need for it more and more, especially with the advent of AI, and we're taking a moment to reflect at our own humanism. But I would really love to hear about what your thinking is on the future of SEL and what you hope to see in the future.
Well, I think this is going to be driven not necessarily for the better, but ultimately for the better by the workplace, because
Mhm.
more and more employers, large corporations, are recognizing that they need quality people to be on their work in their workforce. They need people who are good thinkers, who think out of the box, who are good working in a team, who don't feel they have to own every good idea, that who have empathy, who have good communication skills. I mean, they need this social emotional learning suite of skills, as well as good pro-social values in their potential employees.
Right.
And I think that's going to be a big driver, because they will, and through money, can dictate that these things are coming into K to 12 education and also higher education, so that their workforces won't have to spend all their time in remediation, and they don't have to worry so much about turnover and
Mhm.
absenteeism and chronic illness and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
I think we're gonna. I think the future is positive, because there are more and more converging forces saying that yes, we believe it's important that our children have social, emotional competence and character.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm hoping. I keep on going back to this phrase that you mentioned and that I read, inspiration before remediation. And I really love that. And I'm hoping to see that progress through. And I think you're right. I think, through workforce and, um, you know, that will really help shape our civility.
Yeah, and
Because I mean, it's
yeah, I just want to comment on that phrase: inspiration precedes remediation. We're always too quick to fix people,
right.
which implies that they have something wrong with them. But the most common thing that people have wrong with them is that they don't perceive their sense of positive purpose, that they don't feel a sense of inspiration to accomplish things. If they
Mhm.
had that sense of inspiration, we would find that their performance would be better. It's not like they're lacking in all these things and need to be remediated. It's that they don't perceive that what they have is valued. They don't perceive that they have agency. They don't perceive they have a purpose. And so
Mhm.
if we inspire our young people to feel like they've got potential, possibility, and purpose, we're going to find they need a lot less remediation. And
Right.
then even when they do need remediation, it will be received eagerly, because
Right.
they'll know that this is going to help me to achieve my valued outcomes. This is not because I've got something wrong with me. This is going to help me be more successful in what I care about.
Right.
So that's why that phrase came to us, and that's why I think it's so important.
Yeah. I love that phrase so much because it really stuck with me because, once you realize, you get to a point where you're like, you learn so much and you think of that quote, I know nothing. It's like the more you know, the more you don't know. And then
Right.
this as you're talking about right now, remediation doesn't feel like an attack. Remediation feels like this is an opportunity for me to learn. And when you're on that lifelong learning process, you also want to be around people who have something to teach you, because those are hard to find.
Yep.
So with that being said, I really want to thank you for being on the podcast today. It's only 30 minutes, and I know it went by really fast, and we for another 2 hours. But for our listeners, if you're interested in diving deeper into Dr. Elias's work, we recommend picking up one of his many books. These are only 2 of his books, but Students Taking Action Together and Morning Classroom Conversations. We will be linking these books on our site at www.civiltalk.com/podcast, alongside his work at Rutgers and the Academy for SEL in School, which we didn't cover that. You know what? We're going to have you on the show again. It's going to happen, and we're going to talk more about that. But thank you again for being on our show today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Until next time, keep striving for civility and empathy in all that you do. Thanks.